Well, then, welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I am Nerder Doug, and tonight I am asking the question: what makes monsters so cool in D&D with this nerd?
The Darkest Dave. What indeed does make monsters cool, or why is monster cool, or why are monsters cool? So, I feel like as a DM, there's so many times that I've built encounters just because I'm like, I just want to use this monster because it's cool, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure.
When you
Yeah,
said
tons
like
of time.
put that out as a topic, I'm like, yeah, I can get behind that because that's a total mood as a DM, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, many times. I mean, how many times have we looked through like the monster manual or some other person, tome of Beast or whatever, and just
Uh,
whether it's the art or something it can do, and you're like, yep, that's what I want to
or a
use.
piece of the lore that you just want to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, it'll fit right in with something you were doing. Like, oh, that makes sense. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really stands out about 5e D&D and the monsters is they have done such a good job with creating monster lore for monsters that traditionally the lore was kind of meh, right? It was maybe a little boring, wasn't like too exciting, or it was like, it was straight up just lazy writing, like
Yeah, I was
the
gonna say, I
Wizards
want
did.
to say, thinking back to like first edition Monster Manual and stuff, which all due respect, did it even have any kind of lore, or was it like just
Oh
that
yeah,
box?
there's always
Did
like
it?
it, yeah, because it had like like ecology stuff and bits about the monsters.
Hmm. Yeah, I
Um,
don't really recall.
Yeah, because actually in some ways they wrote a lot more but said a lot less. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
uh,
Um.
and so like they write a lot less now, but the writing like they impart way more with far less writing. Like I think back
Yes.
um to a session that Ted ran,
Uh huh.
and like he used gnolls and he did the whole gnoll turning the hyenas into gnolls, right, ritual, and
Hmm.
like had us kind of witness it from afar, and like it was such a cool scene in the game, and one of the players was like, oh my god, did you make that up? And it's like, no, it's right in the monster manual.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Was this a 5e game?
yeah, this is like
Oh.
one of the first 5e game
Oh, okay. Yeah, I
that he
have to
ran.
agree with you 100%. Like, just those, I mean, often it's just like two little paragraphs, right? In the entry in the monster manual, whatever. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, so many cool ideas, whether it's like, something that like the behavior of the monster that's like, oh, that's neat. Like, often I think like I can imagine how that would hook the characters,
yeah.
you know, whether it's like some threat they represent or whatever. Her crab in the chat mentioned something about getting into 4E as a DM. That's on my bullet points to touch on 4E, which is my favorite edition of the game. Um, so hang in there for that discussion when we get to that. When I threw out that topic, honestly, it was right after putting together our most recent CBG character build guide for the Wolverine
Yeah.
character. And
Experiment X.
yes. And I mean, we've done over 60 of those things now, plus, all the other like products and things we have.
Yeah.
And I like creating monsters. It's a lot of fun to like come up with interesting abilities and like actions and bonus actions and sort of like imagine like, well, how would this flow and like how would this play out in combat or whatever the situation is. So it's almost as much fun to me as like Ted is making magic items, I think.
Ted does like to make magic items. Yeah, like and like designing and creating new monsters is kind of our jam as well, and we love doing that. I must say most of the time, like I will just open up D&D Beyond in several tabs, and I'll just have like two or three monsters
Mm-hmm.
open, and on the fly just be like, all right. Like I did this whole adventure that was like it was a little bit of a sci-fi horror game for
Okay.
5e D&D. I don't know if I just ran it as a one shot back in the one shot group days, or if I ran it as one of the fan games. And it was actually the first game I had ran for Professor Bell.
Okay.
Um, and like villagers were going missing, and I just totally like mashed together like aliens and the Zerg from
Mm,
StarCraft,
hmm.
and I just did it by taking ankegs
Yeah.
and different NPCs and like mixing their abilities together uh,
Hmm.
to kind of get the effect that I wanted.
Yeah, to me, after all these years of like tinkering with those things, like personally and professionally, like I sort of see the CR system and like that chart in the DMG as from a different way of in the sense of like, it's kind of like a guide so that you can just put your ideas down and then like tailor them to the CR you need. You know what I mean? Like not
Uh-huh.
so much of like for instance, it's like, well, how much damage can this thing do in a round, and like what is its hit points and stuff. So you know, like it's not so much of like how many abilities does this thing have, how many spells can it cast, of just or and more just about like, well, how do you make what you want fit? So I mean, a lot of times creatures like that we make up or in our games or products, it's like just looking at traits of existing creatures and like, oh, what if this creature had this? Like we talked about in the oozes, jellies, and slimes thing, like
Yeah,
split. It's like it's a pretty easy thing. It's like that's it. It has X amount of hit points. It splits, and there's two versions. You just slap that on anything and just follow those same
that is
thing.
great. That's the
Okay.
great thing about codified mechanics, right?
Yes.
Where like you can pull out the mechanic and just use that, but maybe you describe it in a different way. But
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, mechanically, it does what you want, and how it looks doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah.
That was
I
like
don't
the
work.
great thing about playing Mutants and Masterminds, right? Like, because it's an effect based game,
Mm-hmm.
so like it's everything is based on effects. Like nothing actually, everything else is just a descriptor. So if you know the effect you want, it was really easy. And also like that system had this very easy swing. So like if you knew what level your party was, like you just like it
Mm-hmm.
was so easy to make monsters on the fly or bad guys on the fly. One of the things Ted loved about running that game was you just needed to know their power level, and it was a swing of five one way or the other, and you could just like spit out new things without like I remember third edition where you'd be surrounded by books creating monsters for
Mm-hmm.
hours, and then your party
Yeah.
would just decimate in 10 seconds.
Mm-hmm. That sort of thing's interesting too, from like a from our perspective too, or anybody that makes like content for consumers, is like, well, in your games, yes, it's like, I mean, you don't have to like figure out, well, how many average hit points would it have? It has this hit die and this thing. You can if you want. I probably do now just because I'm used to it.
Yeah.
But you don't have to do all the math, so to speak, or show your work and stuff. Like it's almost a sense of like, well, if you wanted something to have 200 hit points, you'd just figure out what that would be if you really wanted to like show the work. It's like, okay, then it's 25 d10 plus blah 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 or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And when you're gaming, it doesn't matter. Like when you're just
Right.
running the game as the dungeon master. I
Mm-hmm.
guess now when we make stuff, it does matter, and we have to make it
Yeah.
all make sense. But
Yeah.
when you're
But again,
behind
I
the
mean, that's
screen,
often just to not to to show how the sausage is made. Like there's many times when we'll be working on something, and what we started with, it's like it has, I just keep using hit points as an example,
yeah,
like it has 160 hit points, and like maybe whoever wrote it, like it's a medium creature but they put d10 hit dice. It's like, okay, well, it's CR whatever, and that's how many hit points it should have, so it's like it just needs more d8s, and then that makes the con bonus go up. So just like keep changing it a little bit. It's like, well, I had 4.5
playing
and
with the
4.
dials. Yeah.
Yeah.
What monsters scream cool for you?
Boy, I mean, I just love actual, it's funny because monsters isn't an actual like game term. Creatures is, right?
Yeah,
But like even in, I think it's in the monster manual, it just explains how like, well, monsters just means like things that oppose the party.
yeah.
But so it could include like cultists and all that stuff. But honestly, I like monsters like you know chimeras and remorazes, and even like oozes and
You like
just
things
things
the
that are
party can't
monsters.
reason with.
Yeah, but also it's just fun. I mean, you can get a tremendous amount of value out of just like selling the sizzle as a DM, right? Like if it's a Remoraz battle, it's like if you just say like a large size insectoid attacks, blah blah blah. But I mean, I've noticed over the years in all the games I've run, that's like you can kind of mold the player's perception just in how you describe the thing. Like if you say like, this humongous like insectoid like radiating heat just like bursts out of the snow and like flings rock everywhere, it's like they just get tense, you know what I mean? It's like, oh man, this thing sounds scary, even if it's just the same collection of hit points and hyper classes.
It's funny you mentioned the Remoraz, because
it's a favorite.
It is a favorite, but for the same reason, right? Like the Remoraz, Umberhulk, Ankegs, Boulets. Mm-hmm. Is it Boulet or Bullet? I don't know.
That's Boulet.
Boulets, right? I like those. I love those monsters just like that burst from the ground.
Yes.
And then they like spit acid on you, mesmerize you, run you through with one of their wicked claws.
Yeah, I also particularly like because it's like built-in way to break state, right? Like there's like that's what they do. Like Umberhulks, it's like they just burst out of the wall and attack, and their glittering eyes confuse you and stuff like that. Boulet is the same thing. That's how they get you.
Yeah, I guess for me it's just like ambush monsters. I just think they're fun
because you're a lot like me, or I should say I've taken a lot of it, influence from you in the sense of like, a lot of times we're just rolling with it, and those kind of things make sense when you feel like, okay, this is getting kind of bored. I need something to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, that's what they do. And and if they're, especially for people that are more familiar with D&D, it doesn't seem like unbelievable to them because like, because that's what they do. They ambush you.
When your players are boring you with their shopping montage, have the Umberhulk burst from the ground.
Yeah.
And eat the vendor's face that they were just bartering with.
or at least put them in peril.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's a great thing to do, because like, well, obviously the players care about that stuff, so maybe they'll
maybe, or they're like, ooh, look, everything's free now.
Yeah, that's true too. It's a good litmus test for your moral fiber.
Oh no, don't bother, they're gonna fail every time. They're not good with that at all.
But also, I mean, more than just like, like you said, they can't be like racist and stuff, but they're just fun in a sense of like, they don't have to have like a complex motivation, whether it's just like they're hungry or it's just like an evil chimera that wants to cause pain and, rule an area and stuff like that. It's more, I feel like it spurs action more, because it's not like, well, maybe we can, start a whisper campaign against this thing. It's like, no, it's just a monster terrorizing the countryside.
Yeah, they're simple and pure and honest in what they want and what they are. They just want to eat your face. Yeah. That's it, because it takes.
And I guess after all these games, I don't know if you agree, but it's like, in general, I just kind of trust that players will sort of. In fact, I think it's unavoidable that players will sort of like connect the dots and sort of develop their own story in the midst of dealing with that. So it's like, look, here's the threat. The story is how whatever you go through dealing with it.
Inevitably,
like they'll probably meet people along the way and make friends, and maybe meet a farmer. It's like, yeah, he just burned my whole crops down and killed like my favorite cow and stuff, and just whatever.
Inevitably, that one player will still try and tame the Hellhound anyway.
Sure.
Not looking to anyone in particular, Robin.
But as you very well know from your troglodytes and stuff too, it's like they can try, but sometimes monsters just chaotic evil want to kill you and eat your face. So it's like, you can try to be nice, but they're not going to want to be nice to you.
I think it's good to let them do it for a while, and then when they're you kind of lull them a little bit, and then you try and eat their face.
Right.
You don't want them to just give up on trying to cuddle the troglodyte.
Mm-hmm. Nicholas Schubert, good to see them in the chat, brings up some that I was going to mention too. Is their favorite monster is giants. They had a lot of fun DMing them during Storm King's Thunder. Often like a sort of put upon monster as just being like a big sack of hit points. But again, I think that's something where you like sell the sizzle. I mean, sure, even the most, most players are going to understand, okay, it's just got hit points and armor class. But at least if you can sell like how, dynamic the situation is, I mean, that's like its fist is like as, big as your whole body and stuff, or like, you see if somebody just get like pulped by a boulder or whatever.
Giants aren't.
And also those are things where like, I don't suggest getting like bogged down in crunchiness, but there's a lot going on besides the stat block. Like a giant could provide cover for a lot of creatures that it's with, right? Just by standing there. So like all those hobgoblins it's with would have like, I don't know, 3/4 cover behind it or something, for instance.
Yeah,
I mean,
or if it was happened to be wearing like an armored Howdah backpack, right, that they could hide in and shoot arrows from.
Yeah. And there's the things like climbing onto creatures and the DMG and just all that kind of stuff makes it much more interesting. I mean, even if a giant, like say a giant grappled a character and it's 20 feet tall and just drops you, that's 4d6 damage, right? So like if it held you up really high.
Oh yeah, yeah. Or if chucked you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then, again, that's something that's like, sure, if you want to get into the nuts and bolts, you could probably figure out like how much could a giant lift, but I'm almost certain it would be a lot more than the player character.
Oh, you don't have to figure it out. It can throw boulders. A player's easily, a boulder or less, right?
Sure. Yeah, as we know from calculating, it's like people in D&D world, strength is a lot higher than the average Earthling.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things too. It's like, I mean, honestly, it's just I guess it wouldn't be fun, but in theory, like, a giant could be a much bigger threat, right? Like if they were to just grapple instead of attack, and then chuck you, right?
Yeah.
Like it would hurt. It would do some damage, maybe even a decent amount of damage, right? They could probably throw you at least 20d6 squares, away in damage away.
Yeah.
But the worst part is the amount of time it would take you to get back into the fight.
But see, that's why I think like people that crave like more tactical stuff and crunchy stuff, that's the kind of thing I think they would like, because it's like, yeah, that's why you make sure you don't get caught by the giant and don't just like run out there and like, he'll just healing word me, and when I get up, it's like, not if you're 120 feet away, and like slammed up against the wall and crumpled in the corner.
I mean, like, I don't know how far. What's the range on a frost giant? Like,
I mean, at the very least, you could say they grapple you and use you as an improvised weapon, so they could.
That's always good. I mean, they can throw a rock 240 feet.
Right.
So I think if they can throw a rock 240 feet, they can throw an adventure 240 feet.
And they ain't aiming at anything, so it's like, sure, I'll roll with disadvantage. It's like, oh, you didn't hit the rock wall, you hit the ground instead. I mean,
I wouldn't even roll. I'd just be like, you went this far.
Yeah,
Yeah, eventually you're going to hit the ground and take some damage.
Yeah.
And it would just be annoying. But, like, I guess the thing is to think about, like, all monsters are cool, right? You just have to figure out what makes that monster cool. And, the circumstances in which you're going to use it that's going to highlight that particular thing.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Nicholas brings up a great point with the giants is like, if you find them in their environment where there's giant buildings and everything is giant sized, like it just changes the dynamic of the terrain itself, right? And that's just one example. You could do a lot more with that. It's just a matter of figuring out, well, what's going to make this monster cool? Like Tucker's kobolds, right, really just leans into the fact that kobolds are bastards and they're going to use a lot of traps. So I know, like, Ted's run a dragon hunt game where you had to face the minions first, and they were all like half dragon kobolds, and they had tons of traps all over the place that would go off at like above the kobolds' heads.
Oh yeah, like scythe blades and stuff.
So if you're a medium-sized adventurer, you're gonna catch it. If you're small, you would miss it. You just have to deal with the kobolds.
Right.
Yeah, but it's and also like I've done that as well in my own games where the kobolds, would use murder holes and have secret,
Mhm.
secret tunnels, and the tunnels are small, so if you're medium, you're gonna be crypt. Like, it's really just figuring out. You gotta like to figure out that particular monster and really play into what is cool about them, what makes them challenging and going to be an interesting encounter.
Yeah.
Because if you take any monster for the most part and just put them in a plain room or out on the plains, they're going to be kind of boring, right?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
like when Ted had us hunt down a death tyrant, right? Like the lair was a pain in the ass because you couldn't just navigate it because many of the tunnels were vertical.
Right.
So
Yeah. Which totally makes sense. What was I going to say? Yeah, and you had mentioned like the like giant size things. Yeah, the very first campaign of 5e I ran, I think it was maybe the first session or definitely the second, if not. Like they found themselves in like some giant ruins that were like beneath the earth. And just describing, like I didn't say they're giant ruins. I was like, yeah, there's like huge like walls and
yeah,
like terraced platforms, and they were like scaling them with grappling hooks and stuff just to like get up the stair or get down the stairs to get in the front door. You
I
know what I
mean,
mean?
what if the adventurers woke up there? They didn't know how they got there, right? And maybe it's abandoned, right? Like
Yeah, it
and
was.
then
It was like ancient giant ruins that had been used by other monsters. But yeah.
and you throw in like, or maybe they encounter like giant rats or cats, right? Just
Mhm.
domestic cats, and it's like, did we shrink? What happened?
Which I've also done and is super fun in players like that too.
Yeah.
There's actually a pretty fun DM's Guild adventure when Xanathars came out, or Dragon Heist, where you get like basically kidnapped and shrunk, and you wake up in Silgar's bowl. So you gotta like
Oh,
navigate like the coral, toys and stuff like that. Pretty
nice.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of stuff is a lot of fun and is pretty cool to do from time again, where it's just like a really trippy adventure
Hmm.
that people aren't really expecting.
And in both those situations, whether they're shrunk or in giant things, it's just fun to have giant versions of things that are real, like that people know, that like in real life, like giant cats, giant rats, because it's like, well, in that situation, it is terrifying monster, but
Yeah.
it's also something like you as a person understand their behavior, and the players do too. So it's like kind of fun, just like, oh, it's just
Like your
chasing me like
favorite,
a
the giant
mouse.
centipede?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think those are great monsters because like they're just scary. I mean, I get scared if I see a regular centipede if it's
Let
like
alone when
six
it's three
six
foot
feet
long.
long. Yeah, I mean they're like small creatures. I think right, like a
Yeah,
giant
yeah.
centipede. It might even be medium, where it's like it's probably like a 2 foot diameter body of just like
Oh man, the mandibles on that thing. Ugh.
yeah, exactly. They'd be like bite your head off, man. Um,
At least they can at
so
least take it. They are small. At least take
oh,
some
okay,
fingers, right?
yeah. So they're like as big as a halfling.
Yeah, a small child,
Yeah,
which is
still
kind of
pretty damn
nasty.
big for a bug,
It's kind
right?
of nasty. All those creepy crawly legs for sure.
And usually, in adventures when they show up, it'll be like 1d4 giant centipedes or something, for like a party. So one interesting thing is, we had picked this topic last week, but during the D&D celebration, one of the announcements was monster-related thing, which is Mordenkainen presents Monsters of the Multiverse. Now I don't have all the details. I just kind of was like, floating around trying to keep up this weekend. But so essentially, what I believe it is 250 revised stat blocks. They're not new things. They're culled from all the Monster Manual and all those things.
Man,
For
hopefully
with
they
like
revise the Tarrasque and make it not
they're
not
revised.
such a
There's
poozer.
I don't know how. Yeah, probably wasn't that a lot of it was based on feedback of just like how and why people use
Yeah.
monsters and stat blocks. Um, so that's interesting. That'll be in that rules expansion gift set,
Do
which
you have a
comes out.
particular monster you would like to see revised?
It's so rare. Nah, no, I guess I mean it's like I never really like just if I do use a stat block as is, I don't really think about it, and
Yeah.
it's so like instinctual to just homebrew stuff that I don't know. Like I wouldn't know if I was doing it because I just wanted to homebrew something, or it's like this thing sucks. I'm gonna bump it.
Yeah, the only thing that really stands out to me is the Tarrasque, but only because the Tarrasque in previous editions were
Sure.
so much more powerful. I mean, you couldn't even kill it without a wish spell. All of it, I think it's like its claws were swords of sharpness and its teeth were vorpal swords.
Yeah,
Like,
I guess I'd agree with you there. At least I'm not. I'm certainly not in the camp of like, oh, like a first level Aarakocra with +1 bow could beat it. Like, whatever, that's
yeah.
stupid. But that being said, it is supposed to be like an end of the world signaling beast, and it's like, come on,
It's kind of
it's
meant for
pretty late.
that.
Yeah. Like maybe the end of the session that week,
Yeah, yeah.
but
Maybe signaling a bad hurricane's coming
yeah,
or
I mean,
something.
like a party of 20th level characters. I mean, even if you like took advantage of like environmental stuff and added some stuff, it's not bad. It's really not that.
It gets spanked.
Yeah, but so one thing I thought was interesting, and we had talked about this before we went live today, is like a big change in them is how creatures with spells and stuff are going to be presented. So there's a lot less um, like PC style spell casting, I'll call it.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, here's how many, like blah 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 is a 6th level with spellcaster. Here's their spell slots and all that stuff. And essentially, they have like an action that is magical. They use like the War Priest, for instance, which is like an existing stat block with spells and all that. And the revised one just has like a holy fire action that it's like on a recharge or something. And it's just like a big blast of holy, power. And they have some spells, and it's just like treated more like innate, sort of, where it's like here's the spells they know, and they can cast them like 3 times a day each or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we've always preferred like the special abilities over.
Yeah.
Let's just redo a spell in the player's handbook.
Yeah, I remember thinking that, like reading that news, and I caught the tail end of the actual live chat with like Jeremy Crawford and stuff like that. And just thinking like, yeah, that seems like almost the like the cart catching up with the horse, because it's like, yeah, that's pretty much what most third-party people have been doing for years.
Yeah, just making up. Well, I mean, for us, like, I blame Wizards of the Coast, right? I blame D&D because they did that in Curse of Strahd with their NPCs, and I was like, oh, this is so much more interesting than being like, you can cast Magic Missile. No, this guy has like the Screams of the Damned that follow him around, and if you get too close, they mess you up. I'm like, that is badass.
And that's part of why monsters are cool too, is like they are different than the player characters, right? Like, if they have magic and abilities that the player characters just can't get normally, or maybe barring
you could
like
give
special rewards and stuff like that.
You could give a monster or NPC produce flame or firebolt. That's all right. But now give that same NPC a demon arm that they can throw fire from. That's way cooler.
You even see that a bit in Wild Beyond the Witchlight with the League of Malevolence characters and the Valor's Heart, is that what the good guys are called? Where like Kellic, he is like Kellic the evil wizard or whatever, but it's like he doesn't have a wizard spell book, he doesn't have slots, he's got like a sorcerer's bolt action and things like that.
I just caught a video today from Scott Garibay on.
I know, I love it. His series on each of the characters.
Today was the one he did. He did the cleric of Orcus. It was pretty good.
Oh, Zargash.
I don't remember the name.
Yeah, I love that. I've been enjoying his series of those.
Yeah, he's like, he totally got life goals.
yeah, he wants to be a vampire.
Yeah.
But he totally makes the point, similar to the reason why I like monsters, just like they're great villains, they're just evil. It's like Kellic just wants to stick it to Ringelrun and steal his staff of power. Warduke's just an a-hole who likes killing people for money. Zargash is a priest of Orcus who just wants to become a vampire. And I think those are great, because it's like they just have easy, you hate them. They're easy motivations. It's not like, oh, well, Kellic, he had a tough childhood, so, it's
I was
like,
who cares?
He's an asshole.
I was a little disappointed with Warduke. Warduke has had decades of build up for me, and then to get his stats and be like, he's kind of meh.
Well, he's a fighter. I mean, they're like CR5, right? I mean, that means he could smoke. He could take on 4 5th level characters on his own.
Probably not, but I don't know. I guess the myth of that character has been going on for decades for me.
I will say, as people that have made a tremendous amount of creatures, specifically like humanoid type creatures, making powerful martial creatures is tricky because it's like, well,
action economy. It always comes down to that.
That and like, there's, the things that make characters like they have to have special powers. I mean, like otherwise, because they just have like conventional weapons. Like a longsword is just going to do 1d8 or 1d10 plus your strength. So unless they have like some trait that's like, oh yeah, and it does 10d8 necrotic damage too, because they have like a death blow or something, whatever.
Yeah.
So those are I enjoyed the challenge of that because we do have we try to like keep it pretty. A good variety with CR of our monsters, so it's fun. And by the same token, sometimes we've made creature like one of my favorite monsters that we've made is like a CR 1/8, and it just says like it's like the Mischief Maker, I think, and it just has like an ability that just you roll a random 1d8 and it does like mischievous effects on its turn.
I don't know, man. Warduke just looks so much cooler than he is.
I mean, I have a great affection.
So good.
Yeah, I have a huge affection for all that stuff because it's like I loved those characters back in the day.
That's why I'm so harsh because of that.
I used Quest for the Heartstone as the basis for my 5th edition campaign, which that's the same one the Spelljammer, they never went back. So in my headcanon, it's like, well, I think the League of Malevolence got their hands on the Heartstone, and it was going to be like just terrible when they went back.
They just took it all over.
Yeah, But yeah. Actually, in my canon, they had dispatched their good adversaries, but they were masquerading as them. So like Warduke was pretending to be Strongheart and stuff.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he was like the party's. They thought he had saved them, but they were just like trying to like basically keep tabs on the player characters. So like they named their adventuring company after like it was called like Strongheart Adventuring Company and everything. The whole time I'm like, this is the guy.
That'd have been so good if it ever came back.
I know
players are gonna play.
Mm-hmm. I know. It was a bummer.
You're a genius, Doug. Unfortunately, it was not realized. It was wasted on your players.
But yeah. The Nerdarchy community can have instead. So I mentioned that I wanted her
touch on 4E.
Yeah, touch on 4E. And it sort of ties in with that Monsters of Multiverse revision too. And it's like that's just another case to me where I see like you're just sliding 4E back in where it's like, oh, you mean it's got an encounter power? And like they're sort of like like they talked a lot about the challenge rating and how to like they're trying to make the creatures like more. They're actually like one of the goals was representing them as more of a threat at that CR level because after all that anecdotal evidence after the years, people are like, we're smoking these things, dude.
Even with each Volo's Guide to Monsters, which each iteration it did get better, and it came up with really cool things like, hey, failure saved by 5 against this monster and something really bad happened. And I love that kind of stuff.
Oh, me too. Yeah, and it's funny as creators ourselves. At first I used to feel like, man, like, why can't we ever think of anything innovative like that? But at the same time, it's like, well, they're kind of, it is sort of like a new toy. Like, oh, I never thought about that. What else can we do with that? What other,
I guess like part of it too is like because it's Wizards thing, like they kind of set the bar, and we try and follow the guidance that they use, and because you don't want to make stuff that is so far out of the realm of what the rest of the game is doing that it imbalances the game. So I guess that's the trick.
2C Gaming can do that.
Yeah.
They got that on lockdown.
With their level 20 plus.
But but I mean, truthfully, in seriousness though, it's like there is all sorts of players, and I feel like content creators sort of create the kind of content that we use in our games. It's like we like that kind of stuff where they just have neat powers, and it's like kind of understand, yeah, they're destined to die, the monsters. So it's like, well, at least maybe they'll do some cool thing or do something memorable, or even just, to your point earlier about like the lore or the story, how they fit in the story. It's like, that's all I'm really going for. Just a memorable moment, with the group of just like, that was fun, or like, oh man, when it did that, crazy ability.
In our own monster design, like when we're putting stuff out, especially over on the DMs Guild, for our NPCs, for the character build guides, like I really attribute you with like, oh, I try and make sure they have all the actions to use.
Yeah.
A bonus action, a regular action, and a reaction, just so that they can always do cool stuff. And really, because of the way the action economy works, they really need to be able to optimize all of those. Like, like I just pulled up Warduke's stats, and you're like, he can take on 5 5th level characters. I'm like, no, he can't. Not with 78 hit points.
Yeah,
if he loses initiative, he will not see 1 round of action.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And about having the action economy, and I don't know if you ever did this, but I, especially with D&D Beyond now, like whenever I'm playing D&D and I have my character sheet, it's like, do I have any reactions with this guy? And whenever it's just like opportunity attacks, like, man, like I need some. Like, I think about that stuff a lot when I'm making characters. Like, I don't have any cool reactions or like bonus actions to do.
Yeah, that's always a cool thing. Like when we're discussing new classes and new options, it's like, well, do they get to use, a reaction, or do they get to use a bonus action? And then, like, even if we're doing builds and stuff, it's like, oh, this character's kind of starved for that, or oh, this guy actually has way too many. He's never going to use them all. He's gonna, he's going to be paralyzed from all the options available.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you'd mentioned the CBG characters too. Yeah, I mean, those are just a fun thing to come up with, because, like, usually it's sort of like you think of them in an individual or in a solo situation for the most part. Like sometimes they have allies and stuff. But yeah, it's just funny how those come together of just like, I just keep thinking of that Rage Singer, the NPC that has very little to do with the PC version, and other than that, they have enraged abilities and stuff. But like, yeah, you got to just mention that, like, oh, maybe it's like some kind of, they collect like the brains of famous warriors to like study. And I was like, ooh, that sounds cool. So that became one of my favorites. Monsters with the battle brains. And again, that's a great to what you were saying about like the action economy and flow of things. I thought that sort of was like almost an encounter just from the creature, because it's like they have a lair, there's X amount of these battle brains, and they provide like a bonuses to the creature. So it's like, oh, you could just fight that thing, which is really powerful, or you could try to like take out these things around the room and weaken them in stages.
Yeah, for sure. And again, that's just another matter of like you figured out what you thought was cool about the monster you described, right? To you, it was like, oh, what would happen if this thing was like, they were collecting brains, because that's where the information of organic creatures is stored, and they found a way to tap into that.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like this bit of a sage, and have an analytical mind, but they're also a warforged, so they're a construct. So living, unliving doesn't really mean as much to them, maybe.
Yeah, right.
Lines are blurred.
Yeah. One thing we haven't touched on that is super easy, and does it, as much as like homebrewing and tinkering is fun, it's just reskinning things. I've done that so many times. And I mean, that makes a huge difference. I mentioned it in the newsletter last week, was like, I just used harpies once, and I just reskinned them as basically like animated cloaks that had like bird legs sticking out of the bottom of them. And just, I mean, I think they're, what are they, CR 1/4? They're not hard, but it just changed the whole thing. And the characters or the players just had a lot of fun, and it was just like a weird encounter.
But yeah, then, like, anytime you can reskin things, like it gives the players, like, it's this sense of wonder, especially if you have a lot of players that are really veterans and they've seen a lot in the game. So when you can make something up that they haven't seen before is great.
Yeah.
So Cup says Nerdarchy inspired me to use shadows against the players' party in the game I'm running. Hasn't happened yet. One of my players is a light domain guy, and I'm hoping he will shine, so to speak. Yeah, I'm sorry to your players because shadows suck.
Such a great message. I will say, like, as much as I like, like big old hunkin' Remorazes and things like that. A lot of the things that I think are my favorites are like just low CR creatures like that, like shadows, harpies, and things.
Just remember to use cover for the shadows a lot because they can just go in and out of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Just things that have weird abilities like that aren't they represent more than just like a pitched battle. It's something more going on. Like they're tricky and they can play with them like shadows. It's like that's just freaky, man. Like I was just playing a game recently. Was it with you? I think it was with Steven. Yeah, it was that black pudding thing. I thought that was a shadow because it was like, yeah, your shadow is like facing the other way of the light and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, yeah. Crap. Like I was instantly like, shit, shadows, like they're scary, it's like they drain the strength and everything.
No, black pudding instead.
Mm-hmm. Which, again, is another favorite of mine. I love ooze, creatures, and all that stuff.
So we keep skirting around this 4E stuff you've been meeting. You said
I was just going to say of how, like, I just get amused that, like, a lot of more and more in 5E when there's like, here's this new revision or this innovation. It's like, that's just stuff from 4E. I mean, I've been talking about it. I like it for years. Now it's, everybody likes it again because Matt Colville's playing it. So that makes it cool again.
Now it's cool again.
But really, I mean, it's just a matter of like semantics too, because like so many things that already were in 5e are just not, they don't have like gamey terms anymore, like daily powers and things like that. You know what I mean?
Nice.
Just like a recharge ability. It's just like, oh, that's sort of like an encounter power. And it's like maybe you'll get to use it twice. I find that much easier to run as a GM. That kind of, and I like all the powers and stuff like that too.
I do miss like from 4E. I did dig the D&D Insider, and it had like the best tool for just scaling monsters up and down. It was just like a click of a button.
I don't remember. I mean, I know what D&D Insider is, and I played 4E. Excuse me, I had the internet then, but I don't remember. I don't think I ever used that kind of stuff.
I used it exclusively, and I would print out the cards and stuff, because you could build your characters and have all the cards, and I had like the magic card sleeves I would put them in. And like that was the part that I liked, like that kind of really liked about 4E, and it made it really easy. Like I think I was the only one in our group to run 4E, and I ran it for, I don't know. Ted says we played it for like a year and a half, I guess.
Yeah.
Before we just kind of moved into other things.
Yeah, you played Mutants and Masterminds and stuff.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so like I always dug. That's why like when D&D Beyond came out, I was all about it from.
Oh yeah, we all were like, "Yep, that thing." Like when they first had like the teaser trailer, we're like, "Sweet, sign me up."
it made me think of that, right? And it's like, although they kept threatening to make that tool, but we have not got it yet.
Yeah. Oh, to like just scale the monsters.
Yeah.
That reminds me of another thing. To mention Scat again. Man, I just totally lost my thought. Is that like a lot of monsters that I like a lot are sort of like the iconic monsters that I would like to see become, along with like those iconic characters, like from like, the League of Malevolence and stuff. Like I wish those were as common household name as the game, and in the same way that, like, as a comics fan my whole life, I would never in a million years would have thought Thanos would have been like a household name. It's like, that's an obscure character, even to comics fans. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that like Beholders and Mind Flayers and Warduke and Kellic and all that thing.
I mean, didn't they have a Beholder in VH1?
What's that?
Didn't they have a Beholder in VH1?
VH1, the music video?
No, the movie. There was a movie. Was it or was it UFH? What was it?
Oh, the Weird Al movie?
Yeah.
UHF?
Oh, that was it. Wasn't there a Beholder in that?
Not that I recall. It's a great movie though, with Stanley
Unless
Spadowski
it
and
was a
stuff.
different movie from that era, but I remember like
Yeah,
a
I mean,
beholder like creature, and also that like the effects would not have been great back
mhm.
then.
But those are like their IP things. I mean, I think Displacer Beast is also like one of the proprietary special monsters along with those. There's not a whole lot of them, but
No,
they're pretty iconic.
even so, they still find their way into pop culture. I mean, I'm pretty sure like didn't Futurama have a beholder and Gary Gygax in it at
Yeah,
some point?
yeah. In fact, it's interesting.
Um,
Thinking about it's like history of D&D. I remember from that press briefing about Wild Beyond the Witchlight that like that is like a big theme of the whole campaign is like it's like time and nostalgia and stuff. So that's why a lot of those things are in there.
yeah.
Like Displacer Beast is like the mascot of the story and things like that.
I mean, there's a Displacer Baby's kitten in there.
Yeah, Nicholas Schubert, weren't they in Doom? Yeah, there was like some sort of beholder like thing. Although I don't think they had eye rays so much as they were just like a ball with a giant eye. That, like, I think maybe they shot fireballs out of their mouth and also like bit you.
As you do. As you do. So, kind of like the Scarlet Sisterhood campaign kind of came about because, and I think you've done this in some of your games too. Is like, well, what do you want to get out of a game? And sometimes players will just put out monsters that they like. I never see this monster in a game.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say the first quarter of that campaign was all about troglodytes, but not in the way most people would have thought.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's just so many monsters. Like I don't. It's so funny. Like of all the games I've played and ran over the, my life, I don't know. I don't know. If, I can't remember using troglodytes before. Just there's so many common, things like that.
yeah,
Because there's just so many of them, right? I mean, so many different cool monsters to use and fight.
there certainly is. I mean, like that's like I just remember as a kid spending hours poring over the monster manuals.
Mm-hmm. I still do. I mean, those lore bits are fun and they're like easily digestible too. It's like, am I going to read an entire campaign book? No.
No,
Will I
but I
read
will
like a
read
couple
this monster
monsters?
for the
Yeah.
fifth time.
Mhm. Yeah, and one of my favorite, like the Mummy Lord. I love that staff black. That's one of my favorite, creatures in 5e for sure. Even though I've never used it, it's like it's like it's succinct. It's got awesome like evocative regional abilities and things, and it tells a story. Like in the abilities, it's like yeah, they're vulnerable to fire and they don't get crap, they got crap hit points and stuff, but it's very likely they'll come back again and again and again, just like in movies, like in the whether it's the Brendan Fraser ones or the Tom Cruise one. It's like yeah,
Here's what you need to do,
that's what
right?
they do.
You just need to use a Mummy Lord in an aquatic adventure.
Hmm. Oh wow, yeah, like an
That would
aquatic
totally.
one.
First of all, it automatically gives them resistance to fire,
Yeah.
so that would cancel out their vulnerability. And two, like, I mean, it's one thing to have resistance, but it's another thing to like. There's certain things that just aren't going to work underwater, right? You're not going to be
Yeah.
striking a torch.
Yeah.
So there you go. I fixed it for you.
Well, that's the thing. It's like I think they're designed to be beaten easily. To be like, oh
Yeah.
man, we just fireballed that thing and took him out. It's like, sure, it'll probably be back the
We'll be
next day,
back
preceded
tomorrow.
by like an insect plague swarm, a mile ahead of it and stuff. I mean, they have like crazy effects like that.
They do have crazy abilities. You are not wrong there. So you got to. So the next time you run, you have to figure out how to work a Mummy Lord into your
Yeah,
game.
sure. Perhaps
I
for
challenge you and surprise us with it.
Okay.
So you have to figure out how to like put it in there where we're not expecting it.
But it's tricky though because it's like sort of like an ongoing thing too.
Do like Ted did. He used a glamour suit of animated armor in an adventurer that one of the players took back to their room.
An animated armor?
Yeah, but it was glamored, so they thought they were bringing back a guest for the evening. And
I see.
it was an animated suit of armor. There's nothing sexy about that at all.
No,
Talk about your love glove.
yeah.
That's some
Yeah,
serious
her crab
protection.
mentions, reading through the Monster Manual and Volo's Guide and Homophoes and all that stuff. Yeah, probably more than other shorts, whether rule books or adventures. Yeah, the monster books are just fun. For what we started off the conversation with, it was just like,
Catoblepus, man. Catoblepus
yeah,
for
they
the
just
win.
give you ideas. They just it might spark some idea. Whether it's like, oh, I can picture this thing on like a moonlit night, like in a bog, and like that sounds like a cool encounter to me. Or like, it might say like, oh, this creature typically, does blah blah blah. Oh, that will fit perfect in what I'm doing right now in your game.
Yeah. Also, like, I feel like Catoblepus was one of those monsters that it was one of the first monsters where they started really tweaking with the saving throws,
Mm-hmm.
which I
Oh yeah, that's
really
not in
liked.
the Monster Manual, isn't it? It was in like
No, it's a
Volo's.
Volo's guide, and that's where they really I feel like up the ante a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
And
you just like die, right?
well, it's got a couple. So the
Well, I guess banshees were like that too. They're
oh
pretty
yeah,
dangerous.
Banshees kind of suck. Like the Monster Manual has a couple of them. What is it? If you fail the saving throw by 5 or more, the target instead takes 64 necrotic damage. The target dies reduced to 0 hit points, and that
Oh,
is the death ray.
oh,
So if
okay.
you fail the save by five or more, I think it just max. You just take max damage.
Yeah, that's what happened to Nub Nub, Ben's
Oh
Puffin Forest's character.
yeah. So I definitely I like things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Where where I think it was that book that they started introducing several monsters where it's like the 5 or more is fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe the Medusa might be the only one in the Monster Manual.
Oh yeah. Is it Medusa the 5 or more?
Yeah, because it's if you 5 or more, you're just petrified. That which also happened to a character making. Wow, am I a killer DM?
You're a killer DM.
I like it. Well, I'm kind of a pushover DM, I think, for most part, but it's like, well, sometimes there's a tough monster. And actually, the Medusa fight in my campaign was pretty funny because I just lifted it right out of Princes of the Apocalypse,
Uh
the Black Earth Temple or whatever. And they rolled really high and found this. There actually is like a secret passage from the boss's room to escape, basically, right? But it goes to near the entrance, and they found that at the entrance, so they went right there. So they skipped the whole dungeon, which of course had clues of like there's lifelike statues in the room before, and they just
yeah.
like blundered right into the guy's inner chamber.
Right into the
And
Medusa.
yep, and the monk just got petrified immediately. And it was pretty interesting. That was the time when like strength scores and stuff came up because they were like, well, he weighs blah 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 now because it describes it in the like us when
Yeah.
you're like you weigh like 10 times what you do, and they were all just like weak kind of squishy characters and monks and stuff. And nobody, they're like, we can't move him.
We
Like, what
can't
are we
take
gonna
him
do?
with
They
us.
weighed like 1,800-pound statue. They're like, what? We can't just leave him here.
Does the mage have Tensor's floating disc memorized? So we can get his dumbass out of here.
They ended up petitioning the Warlock's patron, and I talked to those players privately, and
Uh
they had to do something pretty not like evil, but like very
Questionable.
negatively impactful against the storyline, and they
Uh
pulled it off great. So basically, at one point, the party had to go retrieve some MacGuffin, and the patron wanted them to destroy it, even though like the forces of good needed it. And it was like a big like they got it and they were getting it on their spelljammer ship to get away, and there was like combat going on, and they intentionally like caused an explosion in their cargo bay and like jettisoned it, and then they just lied and were like, yeah, like they told the other group party members that
oh,
like,
that's so good.
yeah, it was pretty good.
Like they come up. I love it when players come up with like elaborate plans like that.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, I guess there's something special about like in those particular instances where it's the cover up, their screw up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was a fun campaign. I learned I learned a lot of lessons running.
Yeah, that's the one where your players prefer to like do contracts
Mm-hmm.
and go shopping to equip their quarters in the on their
Yeah,
spell
they
jamming
did plenty
vessel.
of combat too, to be sure. But yeah, they love doing that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. It was a nice balance. I guess a couple of them, thinking like in retrospect, it's like they were not like super hardcore D&D like culture people, but like they were familiar with Acquisitions Inc. and liked it. So I guess that probably
Yeah.
influenced them of like, yeah, that's what they do. They, do
Yeah. That makes
hijinks, but they
sense.
also go on dungeon crawls and fight dragons and all that kind of stuff to make money
Nice.
and grow their business so they can have a bunch of money to go outfit their ship and all that.
Well, when you also like, I guess when you have crazy players like that, it really gives you a chance to kind of highlight some of the monster stuff because of the annex your players get up to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You end up doing things in a way that maybe you wouldn't have thought of before, just
Mm-hmm.
based off of like their shenanigans.
That's a good point. I mean, as we're nearing the end of like, as much as all the lore and all that stuff is cool, sometimes you just turn it on its head and do different things too. Like I had in that same campaign, like there was a nightclub owner slash lounge singer that was a beholder, that was a NPC for a long time, recurring that they dealt with. Just stuff like that. They don't have to always be like like just a evil orb of eyes that wants to disintegrate everything around and stuff.
Do you have a favorite monster NPC that you use that
Probably that Chazzle Dazzle was his name.
Dazzle Dazzle?
Yeah, when I first introduced him, remember that like trollolololol guy that was like a clip from like a '70s Swedish show. He's just like,
Okay.
la, 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 la,
I'm not sure now. I'll
it's
have to look it up.
but I played that because I had him like float up through like the bottom of the stage and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So they got a kick out of that. Yeah, probably that. But I mean, and I know like Stanley was like that too for you too. Where it's like, well, it's a creature that's so scary and so dangerous, and they are like the Chazzle Dazzle. Like he had disintegration beams, and they often like were aware that he just like disintegrated somebody that pissed them off. But they're also like they talk to them and they have a personality too.
Yeah, that's definitely fun. I definitely liked and would have liked to got to use more of my Gentleman Jack character,
Mm-hmm.
which was just a Grell wearing a big old,
Yeah,
I guess they're called a Jeff cap, and he's had a
yeah. I think we're on
monocle.
this of a similar mind. It's like I like to have monsters. It's
Yeah,
like yeah, but maybe they just like a goofy personality too. Yeah, Nicholas Schubert nailed it. The true monsters are the players. Yeah, maybe luck. Thankfully, I haven't played with many people, but I certainly read many of comment and story online of just like, whew, players are just repugnant behavior sometimes, man.
yeah. You start to question what escapism they're actually looking
Yeah,
for.
it's like this
It's
is
like
this.
you want to actually really be a serial killer or sociopath in real life, but you can't, so you do it here.
Yes, yeah, it's kind of.
Why are you subjecting other people to this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's usually like
Yeah.
with like interrogation techniques and stuff. Yeah, people just like, oh, I like to cast heat metal on a gold coin and then force the creature to swallow it and stuff. Like Jesus, man. People
Murphy
are
McChrystal at the top. He was a fun one for me too.
is he the Nothic?
He was the Nothic, and it was fun because like I ran an adventure called Trouble with Prospectors,
Mm-hmm.
and it was very different. Um, different factions of prospectors were chasing a chaos storm, and then they would harvest like the ambient magic that was left over from it. And the one group used the Nothic, their ability to sense magic, to hunt these storms down and kind of get the jump on their competition. And part of the one of the dangers of chasing a chaos storm is chaos magic happens, and this particular Nothic got struck by an errant ray of magical energy and got transformed into this giant Nothic with all kinds of crystalline protrusions, and he made off with two of the the leaders from the different factions, and then the players had to like track them down, and like the plan for the Nothic was to torture them and eat them, something along that nature, and the players wanted to rescue them, but it turns out like the prospectors were actually the real monsters because they were basically torturing the Nothic and using it and treating it very badly. So and it was cool because like some of the players, like once they picked up on it and realized it, and they're like some of them even belong to that faction, right? So they're like, oh, wait a minute, and they decided to instead take the faction leaders back to Gryffindor and bring them to justice. And I think I ran this as a convention game, like one of my first convention games.
Cool.
And the players were like, oh yeah, and then they just kind of left. They left the Nothic to be. But then like later I introduced that character again for the group I ended up running for, which was Ted and all those guys in my Gryffindor campaign. And they needed something from him, so they went and they kind of made friends with him. And they gave him the name. He didn't have a name. I think they're like, what's your name? He's like, I don't know. They just call me Hey You. And then they would whip me and make me find the magic storms. And so they gave him a name and befriended him. And more than likely the Gobblers would probably try feeding him shrooms at some point or another.
That reminded me of perhaps one of the more monstrous things in my campaign was just from a normal commoner, basically, where they just like he ran like a mining company, and some Dwargar had legitimately bought the rights to mine nearby, and they're Dwargar, so they're really good at it, and so, Yeah. And he just didn't like the competition, so he told the players like, yeah, they're just mining, and they're like just
being Dugars.
Yeah, basically. And they went and they just took him at face value, like, okay. And they just went and like started fighting their way in and everything. And that was quite a learning.
They started slaughtering them, and they're like just working the mine.
Yeah.
Like it's like Joe the Dugar came in early, punched in, getting ready to work, get ready to grab that pickaxe and get to work for the day and earn money for his food. And here come the adventurers running him through.
So that was a good lesson for them to learn. Sometimes the biggest monsters just figure out
that
they actually ran into an NPC that they had, a Dwargar that they had adventured with like long before this, probably like over a year of like real time and like maybe even game time too, who was there like as working with like high ranking espionage people to mine this special metal that they needed. And so there was some confrontation, but it was just like dire circumstances. And you know what? No, they ended up they
ended up murdering that guy. They used to be friends with him, but
No, you know what? It was like the end of the session, and so I was like, I just didn't want them to be in like basically murderers. So I had there be like some kind of like chaos warp that was causing the miners to like be violent and stuff like that, so that they didn't feel bad about it, and they went and freed them.
You should just had them run through the whole thing, and at the very end, like in the treasure hoard, and they're like getting their loot, they find the contract.
Yeah. Oh, oops.
Where they bought it from that guy in particular who sold it to them that sent them.
Yeah, geez.
Yeah,
that's twisted.
I don't know. I think it's fun to do things like that from time to time. Also, like when you do it, I think it makes the players think and makes them better players.
Unless you do it too much, then because I certainly seen plenty of stories of just like on Reddit or comments and things where it's like, so there's some DMs. It's like no matter what they do, I'll turn it into a shitty thing that they did.
No.
It's like, oh, you thought you were helping this people? No, they're evil. It's like, but if you didn't let them, then they were good.
That goes back to my thing about letting the players befriend monsters until they don't, right? Yeah. Like, it has to work some of the time, or it's just not a useful tool in your toolbox.
Yeah.
Because they'll just know, oh, you're going to screw us somehow.
Exactly.
So, it is that time. We're a little bit past 9 o'clock, and it's time to wrap things up. But we'll be back tomorrow night playing in Stephen Partridge's game, which I'm having a lot of fun with. My Minotaur character.
Yeah, he's cool. He's good even if Ted keeps getting the ball rolling.
Even if Ted's character keeps calling him a murderer, it's all good.
Yep.
But that's been a lot of fun, and of course we'll be back tomorrow during the day, and the rest of the week at noon, except for Wednesdays. We take Wednesdays off to film with our live chat guests. So come back and join us or catch the replays. But until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy. Nailed it.